Hi folks, and welcome to my review of Last Train Home, which turned out to be a really fun little game which mixes the combat from something like Company of Heroes or Men of War Assault Squad mixed in with the base building and resource management of Frostpunk. Yeah, I know, it sounds like a weird combo, doesn't it? But it's actually based on the true story of the Czechoslovak Legion. And this is an amazing piece of history that I suggest you go and check out. I'd never heard of them before, but I'll link a video in the description. It's well worth 10 minutes of your time because the true story is absolutely incredible. The Czechoslovak Legion were a group of volunteer soldiers from the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the area that was later to become Czechoslovakia, who didn't want to fight for the Austro-Hungarian Empire in World War I, so they went and fought against the Central Powers. And at the end of the war, there was tens of thousands of these guys left in Russia, which was then in the middle of a civil war, and all they wanted to do was get home to their newly formed country of Czechoslovakia, but they weren't allowed to go directly back to Czechoslovakia because politics, so they had to travel all the way east, all the way through Russia, all the way through Siberia to Vladivostok, and then get shipped home back to Europe from there. They had to do it in the middle of a civil war, through winter, through hostile lands, and it was absolute chaos. And this game, whilst not entirely historically accurate, is based on those events, and it inspired me to go and learn about those events, and I think that's great. As always, I'll link in the description to where you can watch my entire playthrough of Last Train Home if you'd so like to check it out, and if you want to pick it up, then I recommend going and buying it from GOG, link down below as always. And just a heads up, I got sent a copy of this game for free for the purpose of this review. So in this game, you are in charge of a group of Czech soldiers who are literally on the last train home. The rest of the Czechoslovak Legion having already gone ahead down the Trans-Siberian Railroad, hoping to eventually catch ship from Vladivostok. And while there were tens of thousands of these guys trapped in Russia, you'll get to control between 2 and 3 dozen soldiers at any one time. And you'll need to look after them. You need to assign them jobs on the train, like drivers, engineers, cooks, medics, workers, and you'll also need to assign them into squads to go out into the wilderness to forage for supplies, food, timber, fuel for the train, and also commit them to combat missions as well. They need rest, they need recovery, they need to look after their morale too, maybe with a pinch of vodka or a packet of cigarettes. All of the guys have different traits and characters and personalities, and this definitely comes out in the story, and who you send on individual missions can have a big effect on the results of that mission and the outcome, depending on whether they've got attributes which are suitable to what you're trying to do. For example, you want to send someone off fishing or hunting for game, make sure they're experienced in that area first and you'll get far better results. Send someone to go and clear a forest for some timber, send someone who's clumsy and they're likely to chop their own foot off. If you keep your soldiers alive, they will eventually level up in all the roles you've assigned them, but also they might pick up negative attributes like being mentally scarred or being an alcoholic. So it's got a nice RPG element to the game as well. And you can lose soldiers, they can die, you can possibly recruit new ones, but there is only a finite supply of them, so make sure you keep the ones that are important to you alive and well. The combat is of course World War I era, and like that it is very brutal if you just charge in like a lunatic, so it's far better to set up prepared ambushes and try and draw the enemies into those. Either that, or you can go around the map in stealth, which makes the game feel like the Commandos or Desperados games, where you'll spot patrol routes of enemies, which do repeat, and you'll try and figure out how you can take them out stealthily and sneakily without alerting the rest of the map to your presence. This gives you some great options for playing through the battles. Stealth is really powerful, as it does save ammunition and grenades and medkits and everything else, but sometimes you've just got to open up and just let the bullets fly. Okay, on to graphics, sound and performance. The visuals in Last Train Home are quite adequate. There's nothing that blew me away, and playing in the game everything is clear enough to see. You don't really have any problems with it. But one thing that did stand out was the cutscenes. They are, from what I can tell, filmed real scenes which then have a filter applied over it which makes it look like it was rendered video game animation or even animated, and it is quite a cool effect and I really liked it. As far as the sound goes, the in-game sound effects are quite nice with lots of meaty explosions and the great rat-tat-tat of machine guns, and there's some quite cool things with the voiceover. Now the English voiceover is okay, it's nothing special, but the game recommends you play it with authentic voices, and if you have those turned on, which I did initially, all the speech is in Czech, Slovak and Russian, and they do sound really good. They sound really well performed, and as far as I can tell, authentic. However, if you don't like reading a lot of subtitles, then you might want to change it over to your language of choice for the voiceover. Now, when it comes to performance, there was no issues with frame rates or anything like that, but there are a few bugs in the game. Things like soldiers who have died suddenly appearing on the train, but you can't do anything with them, but you're getting messages about them running out of morale, and some funny issues around that. And there might have been a bit of a bug, I don't know if it's intended, but my story ending didn't quite line up with some of the events leading up to it. So these are things that will be patched over time, but I don't think any of them really caused me any major problems or detracted from the experience of the game. Alright then, on to my likes and dislikes about Last Train Home, and let's start with the good stuff. So I enjoyed most things about this game, but I really enjoyed playing the train management side out of it. You got to think of your train as a mobile base. It gives you the living spaces, the quality of life for the soldiers living in it, your storage capacity, the speed you can travel at, how many carriages you can pull. That's something you can upgrade as the story goes on. Possibly you might add more carriages to the train, and types of carriage like artillery cars or medical cars. And the thing is, resources are quite limited through the game, especially if you're inexperienced at it, and you won't quite know what to upgrade. And I like that sort of challenge. It's like, oh, I've got just enough resources to maybe make the cars better insulated against the Siberian cold, but at the same time, I could also research with those resources maybe some better equipment for the soldiers when they go into combat. And you've got that element of, it's kind of a tough choice. It feels like Frostpunk did when you were fighting the elements and you never had quite enough resources to do everything you wanted to, and you have to make some tough choices. And I like that in a game because it makes it feel a lot more meaningful. Now, the combat in the game is very rewarding, and there are some fights that you have to do and some that you don't have to do and can avoid. But I recommend every time you get a fight, just play it and just enjoy it. Although you've got to think quite tactically. Don't go running in and get machine gunned down. Don't go charging prepared positions. Don't go face to face with enemy heavy machine guns behind the sandbags. That way lies pain, and you'll lose your soldiers really fast. Much better to play in stealth for as long as possible, and you can really take your time with some of the missions, although some are timed, so you won't have those options and you will have to go charging in. But making good use of cover, setting up ambushes where you can draw the enemy patrols into your machine gun placed in place positions and stuff like that works really, really well. And whilst you can try to do that the best as you can, sometimes you will just get into a gunfight where both you and the enemy are in quite well prepared positions just trying to take pot shots, and you've got to look for those openings to either outflank them or start a bayonet charge which can get them out of cover, or maybe get a grenade in there, or call in artillery support from the train if you've managed to upgrade the artillery car. There's lots of options how you play the combat missions, and there's also opportunity in there to pick up extra resources, so it makes it well worthwhile exploring the entire map, and I really enjoyed all of that. I also like the way that you really have to manage your soldiers on the train. It's trying to keep them all happy, which you'll know in these sort of games is just impossible because they all have different personalities and different ideas of what they should be doing. But you have to try your best to keep the morale up. You've got to make sure they're not overworked so they can rest. And there's some consumables which you can use to help with things like that. Stimulants, coffee, alcohol, cigarettes, all the sort of things soldiers from World War I would have loved. But I really like how you'll develop personal stories with them. Like, I had one guy in my playthrough called Pavel who had the trait clumsy. If I put him working in a car, he'd cause an accident. If I send him out to chop lumber with the rest of the squad, he'd chop somebody else's leg off. He was just an absolute disaster. And I was getting to the point where I just wanted to kick him off the train, leave him behind, because I didn't dare use him for anything. And then I had to put him into a combat mission because the other rifleman was tired. I didn't have anyone else, so I had to put this guy in. And luckily, this trait doesn't seem to apply to combat because he went all SAS on the enemy's asses and killed about 7 guys in stealth in a really critical bit where I was panicking and nearly messed it all up. And suddenly, the legend of Pavel was born. He became my most used combat guy from that point on. And I'm not kidding, you will develop relationships with the characters when you do something awesome like that. It's really good. I like all the traits. I like how they can pick up negative traits from being wounded and scarred and all the rest of it. And I think it works together to tell quite a good story of how this disparate group of volunteers did eventually get home. So I like the way the game has a nice mix of game styles, mixing like the survival and base building from Frostpunk in those terrible harsh environments. It's got the Company of Heroes style combat, which I quite enjoy, and it's got the storytelling in the form of an RPG. And this is put together with some really tough choices that you're going to have to make along the way. Not just choices in which rail route you take, because there are some places where the tracks branch off and you get 2 different journeys out of each bit, so it's possibly got some replayability from there. But choices that you'll have to make, like, do you kick this family off the train to make room for your soldiers? Do you keep a diseased soldier on the train who might risk spreading that disease to the rest of the squad? Or do you kick them off and leave them behind? Remember, this is the last train home. There's going to be no more chances for these guys. These are quite agonizing decisions that you will have to make throughout the game. And you would hope that they all have big impacts upon your story. Well, we'll talk a bit more about that later. And the final thing that I liked about the game is that it inspired me to go and learn a bit of real history that I hadn't heard about before. And I really should have done, because I have watched lots of videos on World War I, but I've never heard the Czechoslovak Legion mentioned. Now, as always, folks, don't just believe one historical source. We don't do it with Hollywood, and we shouldn't do it with games either. So if you want to learn the true history, go and do your research and find out, because there'll be sources which differentiate on how they describe the Czechoslovak Legion, depending on the point of view of the person who's telling the story. But again, I'll link a cool video down below from Indy Nidell on the Great War channel, which is well worth a watch. Okay, I guess we'd better talk about some of the bad stuff in Last Train Home 2, and then thankfully there's not too much. But one of the things that I didn't particularly like, or think could have been done better, was that the AI in the game can be easily fooled. And by this I mean that in the combat missions, the enemy squads, they go on a very set patrol routine, and they're very easily beaten once you learn the game. For example, the distance that sound travels from gunfire is quite low, so enemies sometimes just aren't aware of a massive gunfight and grenades going off just a few dozen meters away. Also, bodies, when you kill someone in stealth, the bodies disappear, so an enemy patrol marching down the road just wouldn't see anyone. I guess it's kind of abstracted that your guys make the stealth kill and they automatically hide the bodies or drag them into bushes. It just makes it simpler, but it just does mean that the combat side of the game can be a little too easy. Apart from the last mission, of course, depending on the choices you make throughout the game, I had an absolute bastard of a last mission which nearly made me fail the game, which would have been tough. But generally the AI, I think, could be made a little bit harder, although there are some pretty good difficulty settings where you can make very custom adjustments to this if you wanted to make some changes. But the AI algorithm itself, I don't think can be altered all that much. There were a couple of bugs in the game, which I'm sure will be patched out eventually, so that's not too bad a thing. And it didn't really interrupt my game too much or cause me too many problems once I worked out that they were just bugs. And one thing that I really feel needs addressing, or could be done better, is that the tough choices that you make throughout the game, well, sometimes you never find out what the consequences of those choices are. And also, my ending that I got didn't really match up with the events leading up to that ending, because my adjutant on the train, my second in command, towards the very end, just before the last mission, announced he was leaving. And then when we finished the mission, there he is on the boat with me, smoking his pipe, and we look over the horizon and long to go home together. And that didn't make any sense, so something wasn't quite right there. And also, there's no ending summary. So, like the tough choices I mentioned earlier, of like keeping the diseased soldier on the train, dropping the family off, or taking them to the train station. I won't say too much about these because they're kind of spoilers. But when you make a really tough decision, you want to know how it's going to play out. And at the end of the game, it could be that you're announced, well, that family that you dropped off, they all got eaten by wolves in the wilderness, or were captured by the Reds and executed. Or the diseased soldier that you kept on the train passed the disease on to someone else and then brought it back to Czechoslovakia on the ship. None of that is explained, and it really needs to be. If any of you have ever played Divinity Original Sin 1 or 2, then at the end of those games, there is a very nice little scripted dialogue which explains the outcomes of the big decisions you made. And the game really needs something like that. It only needs to be brief, but it needs to tie up the decisions a lot better. And I felt like, well, okay, I've made some tough decisions. I don't know what happens about it. Doesn't make any difference as far as I can tell. And that really needs to be altered. Some of the decisions do have visible differences that you can tell, and some you're just left wondering. But overall, I really enjoyed The Last Train Home, and those little niggles aside, I can definitely live with, because the game is a good one. It's well put together, it's well thought out, and it feels very meaningful as you play through it. So if you enjoy strategy games, or if you like something with a bit of history, you'll definitely enjoy this one. Once again, I'll leave some links down below. You can go and watch my playthroughs, or if you'd like to see me play these games live when they come out, then do click subscribe, tick on notifications, and I go live most days through the week playing new games so I can review them like this. Anyway, folks, hope you've enjoyed the video and found it useful. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, as always, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.